our guest speaker, Shaila Nathu, is Deputy Voter Protection Director for the Maine Democratic Party. Well, can you tell us about what's already in place for our voter protection program and what you folks are looking out towards?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually have a slide deck, so I'll share my screen. This is the first time that the party has had an in-house voter protection unit. So I think it's worthwhile kind of going over what we do, because I also know that Chris and Barb are doing, and all of you are working on efforts within the county. So just wanted to give you a sense of what we do and how we can also support your work and also support voter issues, help you guys solve voter issues in the county. So yeah. All right. So yeah, as Chris said, I'm Shaila Nathu. I'm Deputy Voter Protection Director with the Maine Dems Voter Protection Team. So first I'll go over a little bit about what the Voter Protection Team does. So why we're here and why we're important. You all might know this guy. This is Justin Clark, Trump campaign senior advisor and counsel. He's also a big part of day-to-day management at the campaign. So a little bit of historical context here. In the 1981 race for New Jersey governor, the GOP engaged in some pretty aggressive voter suppression tactics. They used outdated lists to encourage election officials to purge voter rolls. They placed veterans and former police as poll monitors. They offered rewards of $1,000 for tips on improper voting. And they publicized this reward at polling sites. The list honestly goes on. That was just a handful of the terrible behavior that they engaged in. But in response to that, the DNC sued, and the judge presiding over the case issued a consent decree, which prevented the RNC from engaging in certain poll monitoring activities. And one of these, the big outcome of that consent decree was that the RNC was prevented from coordinating on the ground efforts with campaigns for candidates, with state parties, with third-party organizations involved in voter suppression work. But unfortunately, the judge decided not to renew the consent decree in 2018 when it was up for renewal. And we are entering the first general election without this consent decree in place. So as Mr. Clark says here, right, it's going to be a much bigger program, a much more aggressive program, a much better funded program. And of course, as you know, Maine is a target state. So that is why we are here. So again, I want to just preface all of this by saying a lot of this might be review for you, but I still think it's helpful to go over. So we can start with a little bit of context about Maine ballot access landscape. We've got really high registration rates, very high turnout of voters. Some of our laws and policies are around the best in the nation. We've got same-day registration. You do not need an excuse to vote absentee. We've got our in-person early absenteeing period when ballots arrive at the municipalities. Don't need an ID to vote, only one to register. And incarcerated folks are able to vote without jumping through any hoops, as are folks that were previously incarcerated, unlike other states. With the good, right, always comes the bad and the ugly. So there are groups, in particular students, immigrants, and other people of color that are targeted by intimidation and disinformation. I'll go into this in a bit, but we have some initiatives where folks are working to identify and monitor these sort of narratives, both online and offline, and respond to them. We do have policy challenges here, and some are more important. Some have reared their head right in the face of the pandemic, right? We don't have online registration, still a card that you have to either mail or hand in. Students need to annually re-register to vote because a change of address is considered a change of, a change of dorm is considered a change of address. And the requirements around proof of residency for purposes of registration are a little bit unclear and do give the clerks a bit of discretion in terms of what they accept. And of course, just a common thread throughout election administration in this state, right, is that we've got elections run on the municipal level. We've got 500 plus municipalities, which means 500 plus clerks, which inevitably leaves room for error and confusion from inconsistency in how the law is applied in practice. So I wanted to go over, so my team and our volunteers are currently working spending a lot of time working on proof of identity and proof of residency issues. I will say that there is like the interpretation of the requirements to prove residency and identity are, they differ across the state. And one thing that we've really noticed is that use of the term ID tends to mean to someone that it's a government ID. So it's like a state ID, a driver's license, social security card, right? But I want to highlight that there are a lot of forms of ID and these other forms of ID, right? A current utility bill, current bank statement, a paycheck, basically any government document that shows your name and address serves as ID for purposes of registering. These items, the ones that are under the bullet, other government ID, right? These are the forms of ID that we take to the BMV or to another government agency in order to get an ID, right? But they are still sufficient to register to vote in the state. And yeah, no photo ID is required. We are finding that a lot of clerks and town websites indicate that you need photo ID in order to register, and we're working with the clerks to get the information taken down from their websites and get their staff to say the correct information about what ID is accepted. For residency, so if your form of identity does not have your current address, the address at which you plan to register, you need to provide an additional form, right? So this can be virtually any piece of mail with your current address, can be your lease, an income tax return, your car registration, anything of that nature that shows your current address. But if you do not have a form of ID, say you just moved, a clerk should, according to the law, a clerk should allow you to provide a form in which you swear under oath that you indeed live at your residence. So if there are any issues with identity, proof of identity or residency not being accepted from these lists, please bubble it up to me and I'm happy to call the clerk. Oops. All right, so in general, our messaging from voter protection and also the party is that we are fortunate that we have plenty of options of when and where to vote. You need proof of identity and residency to register to vote, but once you are ready to cast your ballot, there's no documentation whatsoever required. So we have the option now, I'm sure this is all reviewed, but we have the option right now to request an absentee ballot via the online request form, by phone, by calling our clerk, by mailing our clerk, faxing. There are plenty of options in terms of how to request an absentee ballot. I personally am an in-person absentee voter because I like the experience of going in person to vote and getting it done right then and there. And so starting the week of October 5th, whenever ballots arrive at the municipalities, you can go to your town office during its normal business hours and cast an in-person absentee ballot. The name is so confusing, right? It's in-person absenteeing. It makes zero sense, but it's essentially early voting. And then lastly, of course, you can always go to your polling place, but given the pandemic and given the stakes in this election, note that you have options for both voting from home and voting in person ahead of Election Day. All right, so just a bit about our program. We see our work falling in 3 buckets: information, integrity, and infrastructure. They all nicely begin with I. Information, we're the ones that put together and maintain voteinmaine.com, and we publicize that resource anywhere we can. We have our hotline for voter questions that are asked. Our hotline is quite busy right now, especially with the MDP mailers. And then, like I mentioned, I previewed before, we have some initiatives for combating disinformation. We've engaged disinformation experts, a consultancy, to identify and monitor false narratives online about voting in Maine. And then they have their own relationships with either the social media platforms, et cetera, to either get things taken down or contacting the poster themselves. And also we have a volunteer initiative where Mainers, just like you, are monitoring their own like Facebook silos. So, you know, with the algorithms being as they are, all our Facebook feeds are just so personal to us, and so one feed is not like any other feed. So we're trying to get our volunteers to monitor those specific instances of disinformation or even misinformation that's like not intending to mislead, but we want to make sure that accurate information is accurate as possible. All that to say, though, we're not like capable of cleaning up the internet. We're just trying to do our best, right? Second bucket is integrity. So we've got volunteer poll observers that will go in person on election day to monitor target polling sites from the party. We will also have volunteers that go monitor absentee ballot processing ahead of election day, and also in-person absenteeing, given the uptick in those options to vote. We've also got our voter hotline for any incidents that come up leading up to or on election day. It's the same number as the voter questions hotline. It's just on election day. And when people start actually voting, they could have issues like, say, the line is too long, or like a scanner is down and it's causing issues, or there are not enough ballots printed, or there's some sort of intimidation occurring at a town office or at a polling site. Like our voter hotline is the #1 resource for that. And then in addition to those 2 volunteer things, we have our boiler room, which is me and my 3 teammates and our lawyers who are ready to tackle any escalated issues from our poll observers and from our hotline. Infrastructure is just making sure our clerks are ready, right, for election day and voting. And then we do ongoing, like it's a daily part of our job, is just advocating for the most optimal ballot access landscape and ease of voting in the state. All right, so I'll brush over this slide, but you know, COVID changes everything, right? The state is expecting astronomical absentee ballot usage. Social distancing is going to affect how our polling places are set up and how they are run. Our Secretary of State, we've got our executive order from Governor Mills with her changes to the election, but we are waiting guidance from the Secretary of State, and we're ready to, we're working on advocating for the best access, the most access and the most ease on the back end. And of course, poll workers, it's an ongoing effort, but I feel like it has been, I know that you guys have your own initiatives for recruiting poll workers, but we've got one too. So in the end, that if one of us doesn't have enough poll workers, I think we can lean on each other. So yeah, our evolving response in response to COVID and just the uptick in absentee balloting, et cetera. We're working with groups like yours to get the word out when changes come, because we want people to have the most up-to-date and accurate information. We're definitely redirecting a lot of our volunteer efforts to the counting of mail ballots and curing of rejected ballots. As of now, there's no statutorily prescribed cure process for notification or cure process for rejected ballots. Some clerks throughout the state are nice and will call a voter whose absentee ballot was rejected, but some just don't know. So we have a robust plan for informing those voters that their ballots have been rejected and how they can fix. And then of course, poll worker recruitment. So I know that like some, the media has kind of calmed down on the USPS, right? But we want you to know that we have connection, like we have lines of communication open is what I should say, with the USPS, and they have a sufficient capacity and resources for successful voting by mail this year. I actually spoke with a guy, a union leader earlier today, and he said that with the downtick in letters, that like in general, he's not concerned at all about the uptick due to absentee ballots. So we feel confident that the USPS is equipped, and also now that we're back to or at least DeJoy's policies are not in effect anymore, at least for the time being. So I think we're safe from that. Our messaging is just about making a voting plan now. Vote early. You don't need to go to don't need to go to your polling site on election day, and frankly, it could save you time if you opt to do one of these earlier options. And doing so, just casting your ballot sends a clear message to Donald Trump that our democracy is stronger than his lies. So I encourage you to spread this message. It's one of hope and one of a fight back. So, all right. So I'll just go over our volunteer opportunities very briefly, but I went over most of them. Right. We send all volunteers to monitor polling places, the processing of absentee ballots, observe in-person absentee voting at towns before Election Day. We also, the voter hotline, like I said, is ringing off the hook. It's a very exciting resource that we're able to provide. And our volunteers take shifts on the hotline. And if you decide to sign up, you get to be trained by me. We also, again, call voters whose absentee ballots have been rejected. And we also have a smattering of ongoing remote work projects, including ones I've mentioned, like calling the town offices or reviewing town websites to make sure that they have accurate information, calling town offices to check closer to election day, check polling site addresses. We did that for July 14th, and the Secretary of State's initial list did have some errors. So know that like all of this work is very high impact, and I hope you get involved. And these are the links. I'll send this information to Chris after, but if you're interested in being a volunteer with us, whether it be in person or remotely, sign up at voteinmaine.com/act. And here's this. Yeah, and here are our resources. Something I want to highlight, we just started MDP voter empowerment webinars. They're every Wednesday. I'll send Chris the link for that. Our first one was yesterday. So they'll be ongoing every Wednesday until October 28th. We've got our website, we've got our hotline, and you can call or text the hotline, or you could email us. And yeah, I think that's it. Okay. All right. Thanks again.
Thank you.
And enjoy the rest of your meeting.
Look forward to the information and have a great evening.
You too.